Let's talk steak sandwiches. What do I mean by a steak sandwich? Well, when you are doing bands, like on a cardigan, for instance, a steak sandwich is where you are encasing or concealing your steek in between bands of knitting. And here I have done it with a ribbed steak sandwich. So you've got ribbing on both sides and you can't see your steak at all. It makes for a nice sturdy, stiff band, which is really great if you are doing this on a cardigan. I've used this technique on my Sitsijakk cardigan. So you see I've used this 1x1 rib steak sandwich for my buttonhole bands as well as my button band. So now we're going to learn how to do that on a cute little swatch. So now I'm going to get started working my rib steak sandwich on my swatch. The first thing you want to make sure you do is you want to weave in any ends from reinforcing your steak along the steak edge. So on this little swatch, I did a crochet reinforcement. So I've just woven in all of the ends from doing that crochet reinforcement, as well as for the yarns I used in my swatch. So there's nothing kind of getting in the way of where we're gonna pick up stitches for our sandwich. Now the other thing you wanna make sure you have is 2 sets of needles in the same size that you will need for your sandwich or band. You're gonna be using 1 set for each side of the sandwich, so working the right side as well as the wrong side. I am going to be using a lovely bright contrasting color so you can see the difference in what I'm going to be doing for my sandwich. So now we're going to get started picking up stitches. So now I'm going to locate where I'm going to be picking up my stitches. I'm going to be picking up stitches between what is the first stitch of my steek section and the first stitch of my swatch, or if it's a cardigan, it would be the first stitch of kind of the body of your cardigan. So I did my steek in a very nice way, and that I did it with stripes, so it makes it very easy to identify a steek stitch versus kind of the body of my swatch. So the first steek stitch or stitch of my steek section is in pink, so this pink stripe, and my first stitch of the body of my swatch is in green. So I'm going to be picking up stitches between the stripe or column of pink and green, so right along here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drag my needle following that kind of line to the edge of my work, so either the bind off or cast on edge, and I'm going to start picking up a stitch there. So I've just stuck my needle into a stitch along the edge following that line in between those stripes or column of stitches. And then I'm going to wrap some yarn around the needle and pull that through like so. Now I'm going to move both strands, so make sure you leave yourself a tail for finishing. So I'm just going to move the tail to the back one side of this needle, and then my working yarn to other side, just move it both strands to the back. So now I'm going to start picking up stitches, and again I'm going to be working in between columns of stitches. And what I'm going to do is start going in between stitches, and I'll come up close in a second. And we're going to stab it all the way to the back. So in the beginning I have green on green, but I'm just gonna use my needle, follow it, and you're gonna go directly between stitches. So in that little gap, and I'm gonna stick my needle all the way to the back, like so. I'm going to wrap it with yarn and pull that through to make a stitch on my needle. And you're going to do that working your way all the way across your swatch or your project for your band, and you're going to follow whatever pickup rate your pattern suggests. So I'm going to do 3 out of 4. So I'm going to pick up 3 stitches, skip the 4th, do 3, skip the 4th. And what I'm doing is I'm going between stitches. So here's a stitch here, which is part of my steek stitches, and then this is the stitch column of my body of swatch, and I'm going directly between the columns. Stick your needle in all the way through to the back, wrap your yarn around, pull it through to make a stitch. Now I'm in where I have a pink and a green stitch, so it's nice and easy to see. So I'm going between the pink and the green stitch, so sticking my needle in between. There's that kind of gap with ladders here, so I'm going to go between those ladders, stab that needle all the way through to the back, wrap it with yarn, and pull it through. So I have 3 stitches there. I'm going to skip that next one because I'm going to do 3 out of 4 pickup rate, and I'm just going to go over 1, pick up. So I'm just going to go continuing along, picking up stitches. Again, you're going between the first steek stitch and the first body stitch. So working in between, sticking your needle all the way through to the back, wrapping it with yarn and pulling through. So I'm just going to continue like that till I get to the edge. Right, so now I have worked picking up stitches. So I started at one edge, picked up stitches going between my columns. So the first steek stitch in pink there, and the first stitch of kind of the body of my work in green. So you can see they're divided now by this line of orange stitches, and I'm now at the edge of my work. Now at this point you should have an even number of stitches, 2, 4, 10, 12. So I have 12 stitches there. I'm going to pick up one more stitch, which is going to be from the other edge of my swatch, which is going to give me a magic odd number. And that odd number is very important when you are doing this steek sandwich with a rib pattern. If you were going to just do stockinette, doesn't matter. So I'm just going to go into the edge stitch following the line that I've established, picking up stitches like so. So now I should have a nice odd number of stitches. And what's going to happen now is I'm going to start knitting back and forth. We're going to be working flat, and I'm going to work basically a rib pattern to the point that's going to cover this steek. So I'm going to knit a number of rows that's going to be equal to this height. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn my work. So I'm going to be working what will be classified as a wrong side row of my right side steek sandwich. So with this, as I said, it's really important to have an odd number of stitches for the rib. This gives us, it will give us a nice edge. So we'll have knit stitches on the right side of our work at each edge. So I'm going to start my rib pattern. So to start off, I'm going to purl 2 stitches, and then I'm going to get into a 1 by 1 rib pattern. So I'm going to do knit, purl, knit, purl, to the last stitch. So on my wrong side rows, I want to end with 2 purl stitches. So I'll have 2 purl stitches at the start of the row and 2 purl stitches at the end of the row. So I've just worked a wrong side row. I'm going to turn my work round, just move my tail out of the way, and I'm going to work the right side, and I'm just going to follow the rib pattern I've set up. What I like to do is once you've done the very first row, all the subsequent rows that I'm going to do, I'm going to slip the first stitch of my row, and then just follow the pattern that you've set up. So knit the knit stitches and purl the purl stitches. With it being on the right side, you're going to have 2 knit stitches at the start and 2 knit stitches at the end of the row. So I've just done 1 wrong side row and 1 right side row. And just to show you, I'm going to fold the steek, which is sitting kind of at the back, up so you can see. So I'm going to do another set, another row or so. What I want is my rib section to hide this steek, so they should be equal in height. So I'm going to just carry on. Your pattern will tell you how many repeats of wrong side and right side rows to do for each half of your steek. My right side steek sandwich, or the right half of it, is now, if you see, I folded it up, it's equal in height to my steek. The important thing is you want to make sure you end after completing a wrong side row, and so that it's set up for when we do the joining round. Now that I've finished the right side half of my sandwich, I'm going to leave these stitches on this needle, and I'm now going to pick up stitches along the wrong side and do a similar thing. So we're going to knit roughly the same amount of ribbing from using stitches on the wrong side half, which we will join together to complete our sandwich. So I'm going to turn my work over to the wrong side. I'm leaving the yarn attached to the stitches on my right side half of my sandwich, and I'm going to take another needle and I'm going to be picking up stitches along the wrong side. Now for the pickup of this, we're just going to be pulling what looks like little running stitches on here. So if you've done sewing before, it looks like a little running stitch. It's really easy to see here since I've done it in a contrasting color. So I'm just going to take the second set of needles, and I'm not going to be knitting at the moment. I'm just going to slide loops from these running stitches onto this needle. So I'm just going to go in and find each loop and just slide it onto my needle. And you're just going to run the whole length. Now, the important thing is you should end up, if you've picked up correctly, with the same number of stitches as the other half that we just finished, so the right side half. So I had 13 stitches there. I should have 13 stitches when I finish picking up these loops. So now that I've picked up the same number of stitches on as the right side half, picking up those loops, I'm gonna grab some yarn. Now, if you've wound your yarn into a nice cake, what I like to do is grab the other end and use that to start knitting. And we're gonna start knitting in roughly the same way. So we're gonna be doing a rib pattern. We're gonna do it in a way that it's, when we join these, it will look seamless. So you won't be able to see a jog between your knits and purl stitches. I'm going to start off by doing, again, 2 purl stitches. And what this side of my, what we'll call the wrong side half of my sandwich, when it's facing this direction, that is going to be a right side row for this half of the sandwich. And when I turn it around this direction, that will be the wrong side row. So I'm starting off on a right side row for my wrong side half of my sandwich, and I'm going to follow my pattern. Your pattern will tell you what to do. I'm going to do 2 purl stitches. So purl 2, and then get into my rib pattern. So knit 1, purl 1, and I'm going to do that. And like that first half, I want to make sure that I and each side is, for this side of my sandwich, I'm going to have on the right side 2 purl stitches at the start and end of the round, and when I do a wrong side row, those stitches will be knit stitches. So I'm going to a knit stitch here, 2 more stitches left, those are going to be purl stitches. And if you've been paying attention, you'll notice that what is classified as a right side row here will be the exact same as what I have here. So I have 2 purl stitches, then knit, purl, ending with 2 purl stitches on what's the wrong side of that other half of my sandwich. So when these line up, it'll look exactly the same. So now I've turned my work around to keep knitting the other half of my sandwich. So this is going to be considered the right side of the wrong side half of the sandwich. Again, as I'm working, like we did at the beginning, I always slip that first stitch after you've done the very first row. And you're going to follow the stitch pattern you've set up. So knit the knit stitches, purl the purl stitches. I have 2 knit stitches at the start and 2 knit stitches at the end. So I'm just going to knit, purl, and I'm going to follow that to the end. Right, and then I'm going to turn my work. You will be working roughly the same number of rows of knitting, so it should be equal height on both sides, so you get a nice even sandwich. So I'm going to do 1 more row so that I am in alignment with the other side. Your pattern again should tell you the number of repeats to do for both halves of your sandwich. So when you finish a row, I always like to check that my sandwich halves are tall enough to cover my steek. So you can hold those needles parallel, and what you should see is that I hold it down flat like this, I shouldn't see that steek sticking out. It's sitting nicely between, making a filling for my little sandwich. So at this point, I am now ready to join, and I join turning my work so that the right side is showing. And we're gonna now do what is like a modified 3 needle bind off. So I'm going to hold the 2 sets of needles I have here, which have stitches for each half of my rib sandwich, in my left hand, and then I've got another needle here, needle number 3, in my right hand. And we're now going to use 1 strand. Usually this is from the right half of your sandwich. And we're going to work these stitches together, because at the moment I have 13 stitches on 1 needle here, 13 on the other half of the sandwich, and I'm going to work them together. So I should end up on needle 3 that I'm going to hold in my right hand, should just have 1 set of 13 stitches. So to do this, I'm going to be knitting and purling stitches together. And I'm going to follow the rib pattern that I've set up, and you're going to follow what's showing up here on the right side of your work. Again, your pattern will also state this as well. So I'm going to go into the first, I've got a knit stitch here, since I've got knit stitches at either end. I'm going to go into the first stitch knitwise, into the second stitch that I'm holding, kind of the needle in the back, again knitwise. I'm going to grab my yarn and I'm going to pull that through both stitches, the front and back needle, to knit those stitches together. And then I'm going to slide that off the needle like so. My next stitch here is also a knit stitch, so I'm going to go in, first stitch, knitwise, second stitch on the back needle, knitwise, pull the yarn through both stitches to knit them together. Slide those stitches off. Now the next stitch on my needle is a purl stitch. I'm going to bring my yarn to the front, and what I'm going to do is go first purlwise into the stitch on the back needle, then come in purlwise on the stitch on the front needle, wrap my yarn around my needle on my right hand and pull that through to purl through each of those stitches, slide that pair off. And I'm going to alternate now between knitting 2 together and purling 2 together. So that next stitch there is a knit stitch. I'm going to take my yarn to the back of both of the needles. I'm going to go through the first stitch on the front needle, knitwise, back needle, knitwise, pull yarn through each of those stitches to knit 2 together, slide off. Next stitch is a purl stitch. Bring that yarn to the front of both stitches, go in purlwise through the stitch on the back needle first, then purlwise through the front stitch, wrap yarn around to purl, pull that yarn through both stitches, slide them off, and work that to the end. You will end with what will be 2 knit 2 together. So now I'm at the last 2 stitches on both needles, and as we had been working them, you'll notice both of those are knit stitches, so you'll be doing knit 2 together and another knit 2 together. So now I have 2 needles that I had been holding in my left hand are empty, and now I have just one set of 13 stitches on my needle that was in my right hand. And if we have a look, nice even knit 1 purl 1, and on here you'll see keeps the alignment of knit 1 purl 1, and my steek is perfectly encased. So you'll just then continue on working your band. If it was a buttonhole band, you would work now your button holes on the following row. So from the wrong side, you always do it right after the joining row, which is about halfway of your band. One last tip for your steek sandwich, I mentioned leaving yourself a tail. That is so that you can just sew in the edges of your steek sandwich, kind of where you start. Sometimes it's a little bit loose, just stuffing in those edges. So if you just put your tail onto a tapestry needle, when you weave in, just make sure you kind of pull from both sides. So I'm just gonna kind of close that together with my tail. Just use it to kind of tighten that together, so sew up any edges. And you'll just tuck those in the remainder of your tail just along the edge. I usually pull it to the wrong hand side of your work, so you can just pop it in along that pickup edge and you'll be all set.